What if I told you the holy grail of luxury cars, Lexus, has 3 vehicles that are total trash? I would never buy these vehicles. I wouldn't even wish them on my worst enemy. With heavy oil consumption, catastrophic engine failures, recalls and complaints according to NHTSA, has many people absolutely despising these particular models. As good as the Lexus brand is overall, everybody makes a mistake from time to time, and I'm going to share those 3 absolute catastrophic failures you're going to want to avoid like the plague. Let's get into it now. So a good friend of mine is actually a mechanic that works on Lexus vehicles. He shares all of the nitty-gritty. A lot of people generally complain about these same models over and over and over again. There's clearly a common theme. Oh, it's great little cars to run around. They're zoomy and they're great little V6 engines. But realistically, a lot of these are pure trash, which takes me to the first vehicle. 2006 to 2008 Lexus IS-250. Absolute junk. Now, that's the heartbreaker in this is I love the IS model as a generation. I love the fact that it's a great style. It's a compact sedan that usually features a variety of different engines. And currently, the latest generation of the IS-350 is probably arguably one of the most reliable cars, if not the most reliable, on the market today, and actually has been for several years. So that's why it pains me to say that the IS-250 is one of these models that you're going to want to avoid. Because according to NHTSA, there's approximately 938 complaints related to this car. 252 complaints for 2006 and 282 complaints alone for 2007 shows that these specific years are very problematic. I like to utilize recalls as a bit of a baseline, a guideline. Some people on my comments have reached out and said, no, recalls, that just shows their due diligence to repair problem areas. No, I see that more as a lack of quality control, because if you did it right the first time, you wouldn't have a recall. And the cost of these vehicles, the expectation is high. When you buy a vehicle, it shouldn't have problems, but sadly, recalls are an indication that problems are imminent, that these manufacturers, in my personal opinion, take the corners cut and say, let us be the sheep. Let the consumer figure it out. Let them work through it. See, I hate that attitude, and I've seen this in the industry time and time and time again. And ask yourself why some brands are particularly bad for recalls, like Ford's, and other brands are particularly good for recalls. Cars like Toyota and Lexus often, in many cases, have very few recalls because they take the care and attention to the detail to make sure that these vehicles don't have problems when they leave the factory. According to stats, the 2006 model has 13 recalls. And the 2007 model year has as many as 8 recalls, showing that this particular generation of the Lexus IS has the highest density of failures and recalls across their entire line. Some problems aren't exclusively the manufacturer's issue, like the airbags. You know, they utilize the Takata airbags, and we've heard about that, where they blow up inadvertently and they have shards of metal, and people have been sadly injured very, very badly as a result of a lot of these Takata airbags. Now, that's not exclusive to Lexus, and we've seen BMWs and even Rams and Dodges, and Takata is utilized across the industry in a wide variety of different vehicles, but that is a big recall that's afflicting these models. But other areas that are more direct in control of the manufacturer are things like dashboard, the quality of materials, which have been known to melt, catastrophically fail, interior parts melting and wearing and withering away. It just feels like the interior is very price point. It feels like a 1992 Ford. And sadly, as an early generation direct injected engine, this 2.5-liter V6 is highly known for heavy amounts of carbon buildup. Once carbon starts setting in, the valves stop sealing properly, you start consuming oil because now it clogs up rings and it creates other problems, the PCV, and next thing you know, you start burning oil, the vehicle starts running sluggishly, and these never had a lot of power to begin with, so it just adds insult to injury and it becomes a never-ending cycle of deterioration. It's a brutal beast. Oil leaks, fuel system problems are all additional issues. On top of it, some of the clunkiness, rear suspension issues. I've had all kinds of people complain about it seems like the brakes are flimsy and suspension parts tend to start to clunk and make noises, particularly in the back. And the mechanic that I know has said to me that, Mark, you know what, there are issues here. And sadly, it doesn't align with the rest of the brand. He said, don't let this skew your opinion of the brand. And I said, no, overall, I do agree. Lexus makes a fairly solid product, but there are one-offs and there are misses, and this is one of them. Because this Lexus IS-250 has one of those infamous engines that you're going to want to avoid like the plague, called the 4GR FSE 2.5-liter V6. It does create problems in these engines like severe carbon buildup. It seems to be a bit of a problem in the injection system, and the overall design means that just basic cleanup and walnut blasting isn't going to take care of it because it won't be very long and you'll be plugging right off with carbon again. Loss of power, rough idling, even stalling. And as I've said, because of that carbon fouling, expensive intake cleaning like walnut blasting, disassembly of the intake, and the valves start plugging off, there's a lot involved in keeping these engines clean. Now, this is a classic example and a case study in why a lot of modern engines with direct injection are having problems too. Now throw turbochargers on top of it where they start coking oil and creating additional issues with, of course, the oil and the intake air, and everything just starts to become clogged off, and carbon deposits just create a deterioration. A lot of cars in the industry today that are exclusively direct injected are seeing issues. Why do you think a lot of the DS series of engines, or a lot of these engines that Lexus now produce, have both port and direct fuel injection? Because the port fuel injection actually washes the backside of the valves and keeps a lot of the carbon at bay. The worst part is the expense of some of these. It's like putting a $100 saddle on a $10 horse. To clean up some of these carbon issues could be $2,000, $3,000 to get that cleaned up, and you might do that actually every 2 or 3 years. The melting dashboard of despair. How do you like to push on the dash and it starts to melt or it starts to warp and deteriorate? Yeah, $2,000, because most of this stuff is long gone and the warranty's sailed. And guess what? You're stuck holding the bag. Now, while the 6-speed transmissions in these cars weren't particularly problematic, and the fact that you could get all-wheel drive and rear-wheel drive in these vehicles was somewhat practical as well. The drawback with 2.5-liter V6 creating only 204 horsepower at its peak when it was actually working and it didn't have all that carbon, was a little sluggish, a little slow. And now with engines producing at least 100 horsepower per liter means that this car is way down on power. Should be producing at least 250 to 300 horsepower in naturally aspirated form if you're comparing it to anything in modern day technology. Well, what if I get a car that's well maintained and there's a good service history and they just did a walnut blasting and everything's good? Should I buy it? No. The long answer is this is going to be an ongoing maintenance pig. Sure, if you're a backyard mechanic and you like keeping your hands dirty and you don't mind doing all the work yourself and you get it for a song and a dance, sure. But really, for anybody as a general consumer just looking for a reliable Lexus with the expectation of durability, this isn't it. I can't recommend this to anybody unless you are going to do all the work yourself. It's clearly one of the worst Lexus vehicles they've ever made, and I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy.
Cars mean more to you than just basic mode of transportation, and you want to join a community that actually cares about the fun driving experience? Exotic Car Play Place. Grab your merch just like this right down below. Click and link. You're good to go.
Now, the second one, ironically, is a model that I kind of like, especially in later generations. The later models finally got their act together. They finally sorted things out. And unfortunately now, by the time they figured it out, that car's been discontinued. It's a 4-door sedan, competes directly with the likes of the BMW 5 Series, and it's gorgeous, absolutely beautiful. But guess what? Back in 2006 to 2008, they had some models, the GS300 and later the GS350, that were absolute trash bags on wheels, a literal dumpster fire. In 2006, the peak complaints were 60. There were, in fact, sadly, major engine recalls, and the pure density of complaints and recalls for this vehicle meant that people just did not love it. They had a serious distaste for this model, and as you can see, 2006 to 2008, very much like the IS, it was clearly a time in Lexus land where they didn't really have their act together, with a variety of issues like unintended acceleration, electrical gremlins, steering and braking issues, whoa! And sadly, yes, engine issues. Yeah, we're not talking about a Ford here or a GM with a 3-cylinder turbo. This is a Lexus that with serious chronic engine problems. And the two engines involved are the 3-liter V6 engine, called the 3GR FSE. They only produce 245 horsepower for a good full-size or mid-size sedan. And the later 3.5-liter V6 called the 2GR FSE, created as much as 306 horsepower, which was more than adequate. And rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive as being options and a 6-speed automatic transmission meant the versatility was there, the economy was reasonable, and all on specs on paper looked great. The problem with engine rebuilds to the tune of $8,000 were very common. As a matter of fact, a lot of that was caused by catastrophic valve spring failures. and serious oil consumption challenges meant that a lot of times you had to go in there and really rebuild the whole engine. On top of it, the variable valve timing system, the VVTi, you could face yourself with $1,500 to $3,000 repairs getting that rectified because of the actuator bolt failures that they were so commonly known for. Oil leaks, timing chain problems, and matter of fact, a lot of later model Lexus vehicles had ruptures. And a lot of that oil that they use for the VVTi is high pressured, which is also shared with the engine. So they would burst one of those lines, which was a common issue. The oil would dump on the ground, then the engine would run dry, all before an owner driving down the road would recognize, oh, low pressure light. Next thing you know, the engine would start to rod knock, and that would be it, all over but the crying. What an absolute brutal scenario. While many modern-day Lexus vehicles are known for other issues, like electrics and infotainment problems, there have been some with some squeaks and rattles. It's very seldom that you actually find Lexus with true chronic engine issues. Well, these engines are that. The older 3-liter and 3.5. And now, sadly, we're starting to see the same history repeat itself with the brand new 3.4-liter twin-turbo V6. Yes, in these new Lexus vehicles called the GX550 and the LX600. Now, I'm not going to throw these vehicles on that list of absolutes to avoid. They are late model Lexus vehicles, which I truly believe are in their infancy state of working through the bugs. But again, sadly, there are owners of these late model Lexus vehicles that are becoming the guinea pigs, working through the trials, the tribulations. Some people say it's metal particulate. Some people are saying it's the case of the engine is a little flimsy, and under heavy torque conditions, it starts twisting and creating all kinds of gaps and problems. Next thing you know, you have bearing failures. Whatever suffice it to say the issue is, there are issues with this new latest 3.4-liter twin-turbo V6. This is history repeating itself from what we saw back in the day in the mid-2000s with these 3-liter and 3.5-liter V6s. And before we touch on number 3, I've got to let you know, at the very end, I've summarized some of the real root causes, why this actually happened. And clearly, we know Lexus always learns from their mistakes. But guess what? There are some common factors. I'm going to share those with you. One of my favorite models is the Lexus NX. Now, it's not this particular drive, and the later models in the NX are truly unbelievable. The 2.5-liter straight 4, made it up through an ECPP system to a hybrid drive, is one of the most reliable Lexus models you can buy today. The previous outgoing V6s in the RXs, with the 3.5 with the dual port and direct fuel injection, also one of the most reliable Lexus models ever known. Same with the older 4.6 and 4.7 V8s in the older GXs, very reliable. But this one isn't, because we're talking about 2015 to 2016 Lexus NX200T. These vehicles, while they're not the absolute catastrophic failure, they definitely consistently get lower than average reliability ratings. There are some known systemic engine failures we'll get to in a sec. And even my mechanic buddy, and from my personal experience and research, 2016 is the very specific NX200T you're going to want to really avoid like the plague. Some common issues with these are the infotainment system, and it seems like Lexus and Toyota always seem to have that. Heavy oil consumption is another byproduct of this engine. Hesitation, turbo lag. Now, some of it was a little bit of a design issue, and some of it was just the expectation by a lot of owners, but nonetheless, it was a disappointment. And transmission shifting. Rough, juddery, certainly not silky smooth like a lot of vehicles in the luxury car segment. If you wanted smoother transmissions, a lot of people would test drive one of these, and then they'd say, the hell with this crap. I'm going to go over to BMW because they have some of the best transmissions in the time. At that time, they were rocking the ZF transmissions. They moved from the 6-speed, but the specific engine in this problematic Lexus is a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine called the 8AR FTS. They had heavy oil consumption, and a lot of it had to do with the piston rings themselves and the overall oil control rings. Low tension just didn't help the case. Rear main seals were puking oil at the backside like a 1973 Porsche 911 that's been sitting out in the backyard for the last 25 years, and then poor throttle response, a little hesitation, which I've already spoke to, meant the drivability, the reliability, and the ergonomics, because the electrical issues were all a little bit of a problem. It's kind of a triple threat. Turbo issues are not cheap, or $5,000. A lot of it's labor. The part itself isn't that cheap. The heavy oil consumption was really a factor due to the piston rings, and the piston rings were sorted out, and a good mechanic could sort that out, tear the head off, basically put new rings in it, and Bob's your uncle. But you know what? That didn't come free or cheap, and in many cases, it could cost the customer $3,000 to $5,000. $1,000 to get that sorted out. So nothing was cheap in these cars. Sure, you could run the wheels off, but if you left it too long, the heavy oil consumption meant that a lot of times extra carbon buildup, you had a lot of plugging and fouling, and eventually the vehicle just wouldn't run that well. And again, with the versatility of either front wheel or all-wheel drive and a 6-speed automatic transmission, it wasn't that the core ingredients weren't good. A little bit of an overbite, kind of had no chin on these early models. They weren't the best looking, if we're being honest. I really like what they did with the later models of the NX series, and these weren't particularly attractive. Unfortunately, with the turbo issues, reliability all the way around, and the engine troubles, this was really one of those to steer the heck away from. 235 horsepower with a turbo engine wasn't really that much to write home about. That said, our modern day Mercedes-Benz with the C300 only has 242 horsepower, so it's not way out to lunch. So as I've said, the root cause of all of these vehicles come down to 3 core fundamentals, and I want to break these down. So if you see these fundamentals anywhere else in cars you're shopping for, think again. Early adoption of new technology is always a contributing factor. Direct injection. Look at the IS-250. They started it and they learned the hard way. On top of it, turbocharging. They had all kinds of turbo issues, drivability problems, turbo costs, the piston rings, the turbo itself and the maintenance related to that. Yeah, not good. Those are also common factors. The introduction of new technology meant that there's always bugs. The second contributing factor is the first generation of every major change. Any significant model change, big new engine, new transmission, whole new platform design, usually are worth avoiding. These ones in many cases were just that, and you're going to experience some problems, and you don't want to be the guinea pig. And the third contributing factor sometimes comes down to your supply chain, your suppliers. Where are you getting your parts from? Even if you're taking all the measures and precautions in your factory, the parts that come from overseas from other third-party suppliers are often the shortcomings. Those valve springs that were sourced out, that was a third-party supplier. So the quality control often comes down to the third-party vendors. That's where sometimes the parts problems come from. And so if you do your research and you look and historically you find problems in specific manufacturers, those could be a telltale. Are they still using that supplier? What's changed? Have they fixed that inherent problem? Those are things you need to ask yourself when you're buying your new Lexus. 3 new Lexus vehicles, right there. Those are the ones I definitely would buy, and probably the only new ones I would buy this year in 26. Maybe you're thinking of something different. The only BMWs I would buy, right there. Maybe you're looking for one of the closest competitors. BMW actually generally gives you a better driving experience. Hope to see each and every one of you real soon. Everybody, you have a lovely day. Talk to you then. Bye-bye.